Welcome to the History AI Podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Welcome back to the History AI Podcast, the show where history's greatest events meet history's strangest details. I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco. Today we are discussing a medieval war involving rival cities, political intrigue, thousands of armed men, a humiliating military defeat, and somehow, a wooden bucket. Be sure to stay tuned after the episode for the original song, The War of the Bucket.
It is the rare historical event whose title sounds less like a war and more like an argument between two toddlers at a sandbox.
He took my bucket.
Well, he took my castle.
I'm telling the Pope.
That is not an entirely inaccurate summary of medieval Italian politics.
Before we begin, please subscribe to the History AI Podcast and leave us a 5-star review. A 5-star review really does help the podcast grow, reach new listeners, and continue bringing you evergreen episodes that remain interesting and relevant long after they are released.
You can also share the show with someone who loves history, strange stories, or arguments that escalate far beyond any reasonable limit.
And remember, you can suggest future episode topics through our social media pages. We also have new History AI podcast merchandise available, with the link waiting for you in the show notes.
Today's episode is about the War of the Bucket, fought in northern Italy in 1325 between the rival city-states of Bologna and Modena.
And we should address the famous story immediately. According to popular legend, soldiers from Modena slipped into Bologna, stole a wooden bucket from a public well, and carried it home as a trophy.
Bologna demanded that the bucket be returned.
Modena refused,
So Bologna raised an army.
thousands of men marched into battle.
People died.
And Modena kept the bucket.
It is a fantastic story.
It is also almost certainly not the real cause of the war.
There it is. We have ruined the internet version within the first 2 minutes.
We are not saying there was no bucket. There was a bucket. There is still a famous old bucket associated with the conflict in Modena.
But the idea that two peaceful cities suddenly launched a war because somebody stole a piece of well equipment is misleading. Bologna and Modena had already been fighting, raiding, and competing for territory for a very long time.
The bucket became the symbol of the conflict. It was the perfect object around which later writers could build a memorable story.
Because the war of competing political alignments, territorial claims, and long-term municipal rivalries does not fit neatly on a souvenir mug.
The War of the Bucket does.
To understand what actually happened, we need to enter the complicated world of medieval northern Italy.
And when we say complicated, imagine dozens of wealthy cities, noble families, local rulers, bishops, emperors, popes, merchants, and mercenaries, all trying to gain power while constantly switching allies.
So a simple environment.
Very calm, very cooperative.
Northern Italy during the Middle Ages was not a single unified country. The Italian peninsula was divided among kingdoms, papal territories, communes, republics, lordships, and city-states.
Many northern cities had become wealthy through trade, agriculture, banking, and manufacturing. Their economic power allowed them to operate with considerable independence.
Cities such as Bologna and Modena were not merely urban settlements. They controlled surrounding countryside, fortifications, villages, and roads. Their governments could raise armies, negotiate alliances, and wage wars.
Think of each city as a small state, intensely protective of its territory and reputation.
Bologna and Modena are only about 30 miles apart,
Which is close enough for regular trade.
and close enough for regular invasion.
Geography made rivalry almost inevitable. Both cities wanted influence over the borderlands between them. A hilltop castle, a bridge, a road, or a fortified village could control travel and commerce across the region.
Their rivalry was also connected to one of medieval Italy's largest political divisions, the struggle between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines.
The names sound like rival fantasy houses.
House Guelph, House Ghibelline, one controls the dragons, the other controls municipal tax policy.
The reality was not much less confusing. Broadly speaking, the Guelphs supported the political interests of the papacy, while the Ghibellines supported the authority of the Holy Roman Emperor.
But supported does not always mean enthusiastic ideological devotion. Local families and cities often chose a side because it suited their interests or because their enemies had chosen the other side.
If your neighboring city declared for the Guelphs, becoming a Ghibelline might be less about your deep thoughts on imperial government and more about your desire to oppose the people next door.
Bologna was strongly associated with the Guelph cause. Modena was aligned with the Ghibellines.
That meant a local dispute between the two cities could also become part of a much wider conflict between papal and imperial factions.
The roots of the division went back generations. By 1325, nobody in Bologna or Modena needed a bucket to give them a reason to dislike the other city.
They already had political rivalry, border disputes, old insults, raids, damaged farms, captured fortresses, and dead relatives.
Medieval grudges had excellent record retention.
In the months before the famous battle, Modenese forces were active along the frontier. One important turning point was the capture of the castle of Monteveglio, a strategic Bolognese stronghold.
Monteveglio stood in the hills southwest of Bologna. Its location made it valuable for controlling approaches through the surrounding territory.
Losing it was not just embarrassing for Bologna. It weakened Bologna's position and strengthened Modena's ability to operate in the region.
Accounts differ about exactly how Monteveglio fell. Betrayal or collaboration from within may have helped the Modenese take it,
which added another layer of humiliation. It was one thing to lose a fortress in a heroic siege. It was another to discover that someone may have opened the way for your enemy.
Bologna responded by preparing a major military expedition.
This is where some popular versions insert the bucket as the immediate cause. Modenese soldiers supposedly raided Bologna and stole an oak bucket from a well near one of the city gates.
Bologna supposedly demanded its return, and Modena supposedly replied with the medieval equivalent of, "Come and get it."
But the chronology and evidence are uncertain. The bucket may have been taken during a raid. It may have been seized after the fighting. It may have become connected with the war through later storytelling.
The safest conclusion is that the bucket was not the true reason for the conflict. It represented the rivalry and humiliation associated with it.
And sometimes symbols become more famous than causes.
Nobody calls it the War of Monteveglio Castle,
which sounds respectable.
The War of the Bucket sounds ridiculous,
and therefore unforgettable.
In November 1325, a large Bolognese army advanced into Modenese territory.
Medieval estimates for army sizes should always be treated carefully. Chroniclers could exaggerate numbers, especially when trying to make a victory look more miraculous or a defeat more tragic.
Many traditional accounts describe the Bolognese force as numbering around 30,000 infantry and several thousand cavalry.
The Modenese force is often described as much smaller, perhaps only several thousand men.
Whether or not those exact numbers are accurate, the general picture is clear. Bologna fielded the larger army,
and yet Modena had several advantages that raw numbers could not erase.
The Modenese forces had experienced commanders. They understood the local terrain. They were also fighting close to home, where communication and movement could be easier.
The army of Bologna included troops from allied Guelph cities. A coalition army could be impressive, but it could also suffer from divided leadership and uneven coordination.
Thousands of men do not automatically become one effective army simply because they all dislike Modena.
Sometimes they become thousands of men standing in roughly the same field, waiting for someone to explain the plan.
The two forces met near Zappolino, a settlement in the hills between Bologna and Modena.
The battle is generally dated to November 1325, often specifically to the 15th of the month.
The area was strategically important. The fighting occurred close to fortified positions and routes connecting the rival territories.
The Bolognese had advanced boldly. They expected their numerical superiority to carry the day.
That expectation did not survive contact with the Modenese.
The battle began late in the day. Details are difficult to reconstruct with certainty, but the Modenese attack appears to have broken the Bolognese formations.
Cavalry played an important role. A well-timed mounted assault could create panic, especially if infantry units were already disorganized.
Once part of a medieval army began to retreat, the situation could deteriorate rapidly. Soldiers fleeing in one area might convince nearby units that the entire battle had been lost.
Communication was limited. There were no radios, no aerial views, and no reliable way for an ordinary soldier to understand what was happening beyond his immediate surroundings.
You might see men running toward you and conclude that a disaster had occurred, even if the army's position was still recoverable.
Then you run.
The men behind you see you running.
So they run.
Soon an organized army becomes a crowd trying to escape through roads, fields, and narrow passages.
The Bolognese army collapsed.
Modena had defeated a significantly larger force.
Casualty figures vary, and later accounts often repeat a total of around 2,000 dead. That number may be exaggerated or may combine losses from both sides.
What is not in doubt is that the defeat was serious and deeply humiliating for Bologna.
The Modenese pursued the retreating army toward Bologna.
They reportedly captured prisoners, supplies, and military banners. They also damaged property in the countryside.
But they did not attempt a major assault on Bologna itself.
That was sensible. Defeating an army in the field was one thing. Attacking a large fortified city was another.
Medieval walls had a way of turning confidence into a long, expensive siege.
Instead, the victorious Modenese staged a display near Bologna.
According to tradition, they held races or games outside the city as an insult to the defeated Bolognese.
Imagine losing a battle and then watching the enemy organize a sporting event outside your walls.
We came to conquer you, but the walls look inconvenient, so we're having a festival instead.
Please enjoy the horse race.
Also, we have your bucket.
The humiliation mattered because medieval warfare was not only about territory, it was also about honor, prestige, and public reputation.
Cities displayed captured standards, armor, and other trophies. A symbolic object could preserve the memory of victory for generations.
That is where the bucket becomes especially important.
The famous wooden bucket associated with the war was brought to Modena and preserved as a trophy. Today, a bucket traditionally linked with the conflict is displayed in Modena, though the object's exact history is debated.
Whether it was stolen before the battle, taken during the campaign, or adopted later as a symbol, it became Modena's ultimate piece of civic mockery.
Not gold.
Not a jeweled sword.
Not the crown of a defeated king.
A bucket.
There is something uniquely effective about the insult. A grand trophy might dignify your enemy. A bucket says, "We defeated you," and this ordinary household object is all we needed to remember it.
Bologna never recovered the bucket.
Although Bologna did recover strategically,
that is an important distinction. Modena won the Battle of Zappolino, but the victory did not result in the permanent destruction of Bologna or a major transfer of territory.
A peace agreement followed, and Monteviglio eventually returned to Bolognese control.
So Bologna regained the strategically important fortress.
Modena kept the strategically unimportant bucket.
And somehow, Modena won the public relations war for the next 7 centuries.
That is the power of branding.
Imagine the peace negotiations.
We would like our castle back.
Fine.
And the bucket?
Absolutely not.
The bucket is not even valuable.
Then why do you want it?
That is not the point.
It is now.
Over time, the story grew.
Centuries after the battle, an Italian poet named Alessandro Tassoni transformed the event into a famous mock-heroic poem called The Stolen Bucket.
Tassoni was born in Modena in the 16th century, long after the actual conflict.
His poem treated the bucket dispute as an epic subject, using the elevated style of heroic poetry to describe petty rivalries and absurd behavior.
That contrast was the joke. The language and structure suggested the grandeur of Homer or Virgil, while the subject centered on quarrels, vanity, and a stolen pail.
The poem helped cement the popular version of the story. It turned the bucket from a trophy into the apparent cause of the war.
And that version was simply too entertaining to disappear.
History often works that way. A complicated event is compressed into one memorable object or anecdote.
The Boston Tea Party becomes boxes of tea thrown into a harbor, even though the deeper story involves imperial taxation, commercial policy, and colonial resistance.
The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand becomes the single cause of the First World War, even though Europe was already shaped by alliances, militarism, nationalism, and imperial competition.
And the conflict between Bologna and Modena becomes a war caused by a stolen bucket.
The symbolic story is not entirely false. It captures something genuine about the rivalry.
The cities were willing to fight over honor, territory, and political allegiance. A stolen object could certainly become an insult worth answering.
But symbols do not exist in isolation. A bucket can provoke outrage only when it lands in the middle of an existing feud.
Two friendly neighbors do not normally mobilize 30,000 men over missing well equipment.
unless the neighborhood association is extremely intense.
Your fence is 3 inches too high.
Summon the cavalry.
The War of the Bucket also reveals something about the nature of medieval Italian city-states.
Their political identities were powerful. Citizens could view their city not merely as a place to live, but as a community worthy of loyalty and sacrifice.
Rivalries between cities could resemble rivalries between nations.
Civic pride was reinforced through public buildings, religious traditions, festivals, military victories, and stories about the city's past.
A trophy such as the bucket became part of Modena's civic identity.
It said that Modena had faced a larger enemy and won.
It also said that Bologna had lost badly enough for an ordinary object to become a permanent reminder.
The conflict tells us something about memory as well. History is not preserved only through official records and military reports.
It survives through poems, jokes, local traditions, and objects.
Sometimes those forms of memory distort the facts.
But they also keep the event alive.
Without the bucket legend, the Battle of Zappolino might be remembered mainly by specialists in medieval Italian politics.
With the bucket legend, people around the world encounter the conflict because its title is irresistible.
They arrive for the absurdity.
Then they discover the Guelphs and Ghibellines.
It is a historical trap.
Come learn about this funny bucket.
Surprise. We are now discussing the political legacy of the investiture controversy.
That is how historians get you.
There is also a broader lesson in the difference between a trigger, a cause, and a symbol.
Those 3 things are often confused.
A cause is a deeper condition that makes conflict likely. In this case, causes included political factionalism, territorial rivalry, strategic competition, and years of hostility between Bologna and Modena.
A trigger is an event that sets an immediate confrontation in motion. The fall of Monteviglio and the military actions along the border were far more important triggers than a bucket.
A symbol is the object or story that later generations used to represent the conflict.
That was the bucket.
Once we separate those categories, the story becomes more accurate without becoming less entertaining.
In fact, I think it becomes better.
I agree. A war began because somebody stole a bucket is funny, but it is also one-dimensional.
A centuries-old political feud produced a major battle, after which the victors used a stolen bucket to mock their enemy forever, is much richer.
And somehow even more petty.
The battle itself demonstrates that numbers alone do not determine military outcomes.
Leadership, organization, morale, timing, and terrain can matter enormously.
Bologna's larger army could not convert its numerical advantage into victory.
Modena's smaller force acted decisively and caused the enemy's formation to collapse.
But the aftermath also shows the limits of battlefield victory.
Modena won spectacularly at Zappolino, yet the wider political situation did not transform completely. Bologna remained powerful. Territorial arrangements changed again.
The most durable result was not a new border.
It was a story.
That story later became literature, civic folklore, and modern internet trivia.
Which raises an interesting question. Did Modena keep the better prize?
Bologna regained Monteviglio.
Modena gained eternal bragging rights.
Castles are expensive to maintain.
Buckets are relatively low maintenance.
Modena played the long game.
There is also the continuing rivalry between Bologna and Modena, although today it appears in far more peaceful forms.
Food, culture, industry, and sports all provide modern arenas for regional pride.
Both cities are famous for extraordinary culinary traditions,
which suggests a safer way to settle disputes.
Tortellini competition,
balsamic vinegar diplomacy,
a committee on cured meats.
No cavalry required.
Although the judging could become violent,
especially if someone brings the wrong sauce.
Looking back, the War of the Bucket feels comical because the object at its center is so ordinary.
Yet ordinary objects often carry enormous symbolic weight. Flags are pieces of cloth, seals are pieces of wax, crowns are decorated metal.
Their importance comes from what people believe they represent.
To Modena, the bucket represented victory.
To Bologna, it represented humiliation.
To later poets, it represented the absurdity of war.
And to us, it represents an opportunity to make far too many bucket jokes.
We have shown admirable restraint.
Have we?
No.
Good.
There is one final point worth emphasizing. Calling the conflict absurd does not mean the suffering was unreal.
Men were killed, wounded, or captured. Farms and property were damaged. Families experienced the consequences of political decisions made by rulers and city governments.
The funny title can make the war seem harmless.
It was not. The comedy belongs mainly to the later story and to the contrast between the scale of the violence and the humble object used to remember it.
That contrast is precisely why the tale remains powerful.
The War of the Bucket is both ridiculous and serious.
It is a reminder that human beings can attach enormous importance to symbols,
that rivalries can outlive the original reasons for their existence,
that a military victory does not always produce lasting political gains,
and that when you defeat your neighbor, the most effective trophy may be the least impressive thing you can find.
A sword says, "We conquered you."
A bucket says, "We conquered you, and we are not taking this seriously." So
Brutal.
did Bologna and Modena really go to war over a bucket?
No, not in the simple sense suggested by the legend.
They went to war because they were rival city-states divided by territory, politics, and generations of hostility.
But somewhere in the conflict, a bucket became a trophy,
Then a symbol,
then a poem,
then a legend,
and eventually a podcast episode.
the natural life cycle of a medieval bucket.
That brings us to the end of today's episode of the History AI podcast.
Special thanks to everyone listening. Whether this is your first episode or you have been with us through many centuries of questionable decisions.
Please rate the podcast, subscribe, and share it with friends, family, or anyone who appreciates history's stranger moments. Leaving a 5-star review is one of the most helpful things you can do to help the podcast grow and reach more listeners.
Remember that our episodes are evergreen, so you can revisit them anytime and share older episodes without worrying that the history has expired.
Unless someone returns the bucket.
Then we will issue an emergency update.
You can suggest topics for future episodes through our social media pages. We love hearing which battles, people, mysteries, and historical oddities you would like us to cover.
And be sure to check out the new History AI podcast merchandise. You will find the link in the show notes.
Thank you for
Guard
listening.
your wells.
Label your buckets.
And try not to start a regional conflict.
We'll see you next time on the History AI podcast.
In the year of 1325, when the city-states were still alive, two rivals stood with sharpened pride, Bologna and Modena side by side. The banners flew, the church bells rang, the blacksmiths forged and the soldiers sang. Old grudges burned like a furnace flame, and every lord knew the other's name. Oh, raise that bucket high tonight, a wooden prize from a foolish fight. Thousands marched and thousands bled for honor, glory, and words once said. Oh, history laughs, but the truth is rough. Sometimes a bucket is reason enough. The bells still ring and the stories stay from the war of the bucket far away. The Guelphs and Ghibellines drew their lines, backed by popes and emperors through the times. A feud that stretched through years untold, more precious than silver and brighter than gold. Then Modena's riders crossed the land with sword and shield and a steady hand. From Bologna's well they took their prize, a simple bucket before their eyes. Oh, raise that bucket high tonight, a wooden prize from a foolish fight. Thousands marched and thousands bled for honor, glory, and words once said. Oh, history laughs, but the truth is rough. Sometimes a bucket is reason enough. The bells still ring and the stories stay from the war of the bucket far away. At Zappolino the armies met, beneath the sun and the morning sweat. 30,000 marched to war, for causes older than before. Steel was flashing, horses cried, men chased victory, men died. And when the dust had cleared away, Modena claimed the day. They rode with their captured prize, a trophy beneath victorious skies. Not made of silver, not made of gold, yet worth the legend still retold. The centuries passed, but the tale survived, kept alive where the memories thrive. A wooden bucket behind glass today, still mocking pride in its own strange way. A symbol born from a bitter fight. Empires fall and kingdoms fade, but legends live when they're well made. Oh, history's strange and history's tough. Sometimes a bucket is reason enough. So drink a toast and sing away to the war of the bucket today. A bucket of wood, a city of pride, a battlefield where thousands died. The lesson echoes through the years. The smallest things can spark the biggest fears.